Thanks for joining our webinar today. This is part 2 of a really successful webinar that we had a few weeks ago. Today's topics are going to be today's presentation is going to begin with a continuation of some topics that we didn't get to in our last session because the discussion was, so robust. And then we're going to talk a little bit about controlling access to drywall carts on job sites, how to train users on cart safety. And then we're going to pivot a little bit to some of the new rules that we're seeing regarding cart and material handling, no material on the floor, and how to, successfully store drywall carts, and then, moving materials that are not necessarily, flat pieces of drywall on non-traditional drywall carts. Okay, so once again, the purpose of this webinar is mainly to gather information from the field so that we can create, good resources for the AWCI community, collaborate and learn with each other. And, to that end, we really encourage audience participation. So please, if you have anything to add, go ahead and put it into the chat. We also thought it might be fun if anybody is in the room with multiple colleagues and you're all listening in, go ahead and put the number of people that are in your room with you into the group chat. So maybe Tal and the AWCI team can, add that together and see, what really is the true audience that we're capturing today. Okay, so this is a slide that's the last question that we asked on the survey we asked last time, where we tried to poll the audience to see what type of accidents related to drywall carts that people have seen. So a lot of these things we've already talked about. We'll go over it a little bit again today, but uneven floors, large, bulky, strangely shaped items being transported on drywall carts, boards sliding off, pulling the cart from the wrong direction, the whole cart going off the sidewalk and tipping over, getting caught in between, maybe a wall and fully loaded drywall cart. All these types of things can lead to a lot of different accidents. And, we've seen that this is a very important topic to the AWCI community. Okay, so with that introduction, we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to discuss some of the stuff that we didn't get to last time. So please remember that any of the recommendations discussed by the panelists are intended as examples to encourage discussion. We can't cover everything, and every job site is going to be very, very different. So, use common sense and listen to, any regional safety requirements set by local governing bodies as well. Okay, so first off, we have a poll question. On your job sites, are carts used on ramps or slopes? So your options are never, yes, but the number of sheets that we use are limited. We only go up, not down. And then we treat slopes just like flat ground. So
7% says never, 53% says yes, however, the number of sheets allowed are limited. 7% says yes, however, only going up, not down. And 33% says we treat slopes just like flat ground.
So as I expected, there is a lot of different variation on, how people approach slopes. So I'm going to turn it over to our panel right now and kind of discuss that a little bit. So George, Ed, Mike, what type of degree of slopes do you guys allow on your job sites? What's the rule of thumb for figuring out how steep that slope can go?
I don't know that we have a whole lot of say of how the slopes are designed and built and installed at our projects by the general contractor. I think, and I'm speaking for myself, but I'm just kind of stating. I think what we do is sometimes when we find slopes that are, in our opinion, sometimes too steep to use as safe access for material carts, board carts, we'll find some other mean or method to get it, to get it on the floor that we need it. But George and Mike can maybe speak to that, but I don't think we get into designing the slopes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when it comes to even the slopes determine what type of degree they should be. It's hard to tell. Obviously, doing the work, you might experience even temporary ramps, right? They are created to access some other areas that there was no ramp there. I think the key ingredient here is to recognize the amount of material that needs to be moved, and the employee to recognize what's other outside of a flat access level, to identify that and consult with the supervisors to see if a cart is necessary or there are other methods to be used.
Yeah, and I think to add to what George is saying, I don't know that we're kind of in the same line with Ed in that we don't have a specific angle of attack or approach that you either can do or not do. I think it's more along the competent person or the qualified person moving the cart that, ultimately if you're pushing and it's too much resistance, find another route or another option. I think the thing that we would see is not necessarily is it the egress or ingress from the outside of the building to try and get the materials in, but more so on the interior of the building where you're going between different levels or slab depressions and in the concrete and trying to make sure that you make it to that next level. And I think an important piece to note here is the capacity of the lift and what you're moving, because some of these different, I guess I'll call them ramps, are not engineered. They are just job site made, and they can collapse under the pressure and cause serious injury not only to the material handlers but also to others around them should the carts tip. So I think that's a big important piece here is understanding the capacities of not only what you're moving but what the floor load or the ramps can take.
So it sounds like, every job site is going to be very, very different. This one is just one of those stop when you're at the bottom of the ramp, take a good look at it, make sure it can hold the weight, and try to reduce that load as much as possible so that, you're not rushing through the process and you feel like the path up or down is secure and stable before you just, load up the cart and go gung-ho on it. So, what do you do if there is a runaway cart,
Don't try and stop it.
Don't try and stop.
Just try and make sure that people are getting out of the way. Hopefully we've thought through that process and the path of travel, but job sites are very congested places, and if there is a runaway cart, these things can carry well over 1,000 pounds, and trying to stop it will just get yourself hurt as well as others. So
I would like to add what Mike said, because this is something that often it gets not discussed, is sometimes it's not covered on training, and this is an important training. We all like to assume that everybody will immediately get out the way, right? But it's a necessary piece when teaching material handling to go over this topic and say, by the way, these cars that we use to move material on certain circumstances, they might move for whatever situation might be, stay out the way. If they're falling, if they're moving, don't try to stop them.
I was just saying, I agree with George and Mike.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Jeff Johnson, who's the director of corporate safety, and Thomas Dumay, who's the VP of risk management over at GMS the other day. And they reminded me that it's human instinct to try to stop something, right? They told an analogy of a man trying to stop a runaway forklift, I believe, and that piece of equipment is, several elephants heavy. So, it sometimes takes a little bit to override that natural human instinct to think, I need to salvage the situation. It definitely makes sense that a lot of training has to go into beating it into people's head that saying it's not worth it. It's a people first, property second mindset, and there's no way to stop that thing if it really gets going.
So Ben would like to know, is the runaway cart like a significant issue on job sites or not so much?
I don't know that I've heard of a runaway cart. I think that these things happen and we classify it as a near miss, or, people don't really speak up about the occurrence. It probably happens more than we know or care to know. But at the end of the day, I think that there's valuable lessons to be learned from a lot of these things. And the more we can get people to speak up about them, I wouldn't say that ours is from anything from what I'll call a runaway cart, but from what I've understood is more trying to catch the drywall as the cart tips, whether we're running over, you know, baloney cords or stuff you're not supposed to be doing, or a wheel gets caught in a hole and causes that tipping motion of the drywall. That's where we see a lot of injuries or strains and sprains happening or occurring just for the mere fact of trying to catch the drywall.
We've had a couple that were two persons that moving a board cart, and the lead person not signaling to the other person, hey, we're going to slow down or stop, and slowing down that cart because of the momentum and hitting an ankle or a leg. That's happened a couple of times. Most recently, we had one where the load shifted and it ended up landing back on the board cart, but the person's hand was wrapped around that board cart. Pinched the finger, didn't amputate the finger, but crushed it pretty good. So yes, they do runaway carts per se. I don't know if they're running away, but they do get out of control and injure people.
Two specific situations I can mention is some of these floors at some of these buildings, they do build a platform to be able to reach that outside elevator, temporary elevator that most construction buildings get. Sometimes they're not level, and they built this platform to be able to kind of get to the actual level floor of the elevator. So when they bring cars through those, you might encounter those ramps, and there's situations where they actually lost the car, you know, as they go down the ramp because they have this specific elevation setup. The other one is weather conditions, right? Depending on where you live, what state, or, you know, if it's a heavy storm, you got high winds, it's a high-rise building, you got those situations where it might be not a runaway, but depending on how much drywall does it have or what's the cart's carrying, it might get blown by the wind. And people, again, will try to rescue that material in order to prevent damage to the walls, if it's you know, a recently framed wall or drywall, and that's when they end up being caught. At least those are some of the instances I got to review on incidents that led to carts being involved in an injury.
Yeah, if you think about it, a sheet of drywall is like a big wind sail, right? It really can pick up and fly very easily. Okay, so the next slide we have is about, you know, required personal protection equipment. Okay, so what type of things do you guys require for PPEs specific to drywall carts?
I think for us, you know, we have sturdy over the ankle work boot policy, making sure, I know that you're showing here, many of our folks in the field either have a composite or steel toe boots when operating these pieces of equipment. Gloves. So we have an internal policy around gloves that ANSI A3 at a minimum, cut resistance level, and then if you have an opportunity for cuts, I know that these drywall carts aren't necessarily just used for drywall. Then we would have sleeves, cut level 3 sleeves on as well. And then outside of that, you have your standard PPE, long pants, shirt with sleeves, hard hat, or helmet, and safety glasses.
I think we're on the same boat, kind of what Mike was describing as far as the arm protection, hand protection, but I can share some personal experience with adopting steel toe boots. For the longest, you know, it was just kind of make sure you have the proper boot to be on the job site. Then when we decided to adopt the composite and steel toe boot, there was some resistance, especially from some of our seasoned employees, right, where they'd say, well, you know, that's never been an issue. Can you show some numbers on injuries in order to see why you want to adopt this policy? And in reality, that was more of a reacting approach, right, for them thinking we need to see enough injuries to figure if that's necessary. When we started realizing it's about preventing, and then we started going over the products that we handle and we put on cars, such as, you know, 3/4 plywood in some cases, you know, lead line, sheets of rock, you know, other materials that it tends to be in some cases more heavier. The longer the sheet, we decided it was the best option. If I have one thing to address here is that if you don't have a steel toe policy for your crew, it's something to think about. It's not based on numbers of how many incidents you have. is to take in the right approach to avoid those incidents if they happen. Nowadays, with whether it's somebody that has a medical condition that this is just going to aggravate a crushing toe, right? It's also getting run over by the wheels itself. Is the material that we get to see nowadays is all kinds of different material, not only drywall. So it's really important, if you don't have one steel toe policy, I think this is a must to consider and review with your company, if I may add that. Yeah.
Good thought there, George. I'm in line with Mike in that it's a requirement for us to have sturdy over the ankle work boots. And it's a personal preference. We leave that up to the employee if they choose to wear the steel toe or composite. But that's an interesting point of view there, because we do discuss it from time to time. It hasn't really come up as a trend or an incident for us at Raymond, but I could see where that could be of some value for sure.
Stacking drywall. So I have something here making sure that you don't stack floors drywall too high. And then this is a great graphic from Merrick. George provided this about the proper ergonomic way to actually physically move drywall. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
We don't encourage our stocking crews to stock any higher than 6 feet, and that's in our rooms. And we choose to do that, so we're not having the employees overreach, and more times than not, it's actually lower than that. So that's how we tend to do those. But I think I don't want to skip too far ahead, but more and more of our general contractors we don't even stock on the ground anymore. We're having to stock on carts itself. So it's even lower than that. That's why I mentioned that. If it's on the ground, it's higher. But when we're stocking on carts, it's much lower than that, and we end up working off of those. So.
Yeah, great point there. I think we put this graphic available too as well, because that's always a question, right? How high do you stack? Now, considering if you have equipment, in most cases, we try to keep it under 6 feet. But if it's something dependent, back to what Mike mentioned earlier, considering the floor load, right? What is that capable of? For us, we do residential work as well as commercials. Obviously, it's going to be different whether you're dealing with concrete and your composite wood out there that is being loaded. So that is a key factor to understanding the load proportion, the distribution, right, and what's going to be used rather than just pack it full. So coordination and pre-planning is part of this. But having a sort of a graphic so employees understand loading, we tried as much as when we do our tailgate talks or toolbox talks to kind of do a demonstration. We put some sheets of rock on a cart or sometimes metal studs and kind of go over the proper techniques so it stays fresh on their mind, because some of them join the industry have no clue how to pick this sheets of rock. So that's a constant reminder about making sure they understand the size of the load, keeping the load close to the workstation, which is, we have talked on the previous, I think, topic when we were visiting this webinar, is making sure you keep the material close. In some cases, you might have the stack of rock right there on your room. In some cases, this is picking up rock to put it on a cart and then travel a distance. But it's always best to keep it as close as possible to your installation.
Oh, this is just, a refresher course. And, we'll just keep saying these things over and over again. Don't shock load. Don't abuse the drywall carts by slamming them on the floor. Make sure that if your surface is not smooth, you are very careful about that. Don't leave the carts outside or expose to the elements. These things are made out of metal, and powder coating does get scratched. So it will start to rust and break down faster if it's exposed to, water and rain and humidity. Don't ride on the carts or push people on carts. Now that one seems pretty obvious, just like don't, run or push carts too quickly, but you never know. And then the most important thing probably is don't attempt to stop drywall from falling. Let it go, get out of the way. Any other big don'ts that you would want to add to this list?
I would add one, don't cut plywood with the skill saw while on the cart. I had a situation where they were cutting the plywood standing on the cart, and they were cutting through the handles. Seems like pretty cartoonish, but we started inspecting carts as a result of that incident, only to find out there was quite a few that had received a few marks were cut through it. So, you know, plywood is something that comes to mind. I don't know if anybody else that might want to share an experience so we can definitely learn from, but that was one of them.
And as a manufacturer, I would say that any cart that has a cut through the handle is probably now, you know, a glorified, you know, Oscar the Grouch trash can decoration.
Yep.
So yeah, make sure don't to use that cart. That little cut can stretch out, you know, rust, you know, become a failure point.
So based on this don't do's list that you have here, the question is, do you get a good employee buy-in when creating a culture of safety? And do you offer incentive for employees to developing solutions, or what's the buy-in for your safety procedures?
George, you want to start?
Got me. Yeah, you know, for us, it's first, we have to acknowledge first that we didn't have training on this specific topic. As common as you see me now talking about it, you know, we had no clue. It was one of those things that, you know, we figured common sense, right? Everybody should buy into it and do it the right way. But we realized that what we thought it was well known, it was well known. So first we had to recognize that we needed a visitor training program and identify what areas we were missing the topic of drywall carts. We quickly find out there was not enough toolbox stocks. We quickly find out that it was not listed as an item on our inspection list. It was not also listed on our program. So once we decided, okay, first we got to make them aware what are those things and share those type of incidents for them to participate. And then after that, you know, we started thinking, okay, if we get them to participate as far as recognizing things, right? The wheels of the car was the first thing that started popping out. People, once we brought the subject, people were saying, well, you know, the wheels, they repair this car, but it seemed like they put the same type of wheel in the car, but they left the old wheels with the new wheel. And you're talking about a car that's been in the company for, you know, a good decade, right? Which is solid steel. It has this good tires, what it seems to, but obviously the tires were not the same dimension anymore. And that created the car to be a little bit offset, which at naked eye, you cannot see it. The only way we find out is because this car kept on tipping over. And then you wonder if the frame was bent, which is, it also caused after an incident. You think the car fell off, pick it up, just nobody got hurt, good to go. Well, there's more to that. The frame needs to be inspected because think of all that weight that lands once it hits. If it's fully loaded, you're talking about thousands of pounds that is putting tremendous pressure and it's gonna put that thing out of square. The wheels sometimes might get replaced, but how old are the old wheels? Did they replace all four wheels or just one wheel? So that led to then employees who started speaking up. Now, we're coming from the construction industry where a lot of them, you know, just the fact of reporting something like that is not common. But when they started doing that, first of all, it was just a verbal report, kind of letting us know. So we tend to then, you know, started thinking, you know, how do we award whether it's a gift card or something like that. But first, it took recognition. Two, then it took understanding as far as what we were doing and how we wanted to approach it. Then obviously the training. Then it led to, you know, let's make sure we recognize those, which is still a hard thing to do, as Mike pointed out. In some cases, a lot of those things don't get, people think, pick it up, keep on going. Long explanation, I know.
Mike, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, it's very similar for us, you know, as far as the training and rewarding. I think you bring up the good point, like a lot of this stuff doesn't get rewarded or reported so that it can be rewarded, you know, and we can learn from it. The ones we do learn from are the severe ones where, you know, we have a leg fracture, or we have somebody's foot ran over, or, you know, we've either caused that or property damage. And I think that we have a safety recognition program where we would recognize individuals, you know, that go above and beyond. We have a program where we recognize our core values as an organization, safety being the number one. But as far as people bringing up, initiatives, stuff like that, I think that that's where we've seen a lot of information coming from the field. And it will come up through usually like a safety committee meeting for us, and talking about how we can better improve. And we started a safety advisory group within our organization that's comprised of safety and operations to try and tackle some of these things. So when we hear that this drywall cart or that drywall cart is not effective or efficient, or what's the best method, we can reward that and bring those individuals in and have a conversation around the direction of the company and where we should be going with these things.
And Raymond, to really look for that employee and get safety protocols. We also have a safety recognition program, and it's been pretty effective. We also do a safety lessons concept where we're really looking for employees to find and or fix and communicate the hazards that are out on their job site, or if they have a method to mitigate it or improve a process, and recognizing that employee with social media blast and gift card or something like that to encourage the employee engagement. It's been pretty effective. I think the social media blast has been more effective than the $25 gift card for Starbucks or whatever we're giving them. But it's been pretty effective seeing the emails come in and sharing the things that they're seeing out at the job sites.
So from an outsider's perspective, to summarize, it sounds like the employees have to trust that the company that they're working for puts their safety as their number one priority, not over profits or speed of going quickly on a job site or anything like that. And it sounds like they have to take some ownership of their own safety by recommending to the safety directors or their management better tools, better equipment, better inspection methods, ways to keep themselves safe. We've gone over a lot of this. I think a lot of this is just a little bit of a refresher. So one of the big things we discussed was controlling access to drywall carts on the work site. So some of the problems that we had heard was when left alone, unsecured, people might use carts for unintended purposes. People will borrow the carts and load items on them that are too large, too heavy, or not designed to be used with the carts. And then sometimes you find people using carts as skateboards and goofing around with equipment. George, Ed, Mike, how do you guys control access on the job site to your carts and make sure it's not being used for the wrong purpose?
I'll jump on it.
Well, I think usually they're stockpiled with our materials, and so people don't really have that much access to them. Like Ed alluded to, we're on a lot of projects, and I think every one of our organizations has found more efficiencies every time we can elevate and eliminate, or anytime we can limit the amount of physical material handling or repetition of picking up drywall sheets, like George's bunk on the floor situation there in his drawings. So majority of our stuff is on carts. Now that doesn't stop people from taking them and moving them and rolling them away, but typically they're loaded down with our materials for the duration until that product's installed, and then it receives more product.
I think we all want to be team players, right? Especially when we're in a project. There's always that conversation, hey, can I borrow this? Hey, can you help me with this? My equipment is on that floor and yours is here. Can we swap, or things like that? And it happens all the time. I think that's one thing that makes us successful, the fact that we can all work together and tune in to get that project done. But this is one of those items that, along with whether it's a scaffold or a ladder, I think every company should have some sort of a filter mode or protection waiver, right? That if you decide, whatever your company decides to play and allow somebody to use it, there's an understanding of what the limitations are. It requires some minimum inspection, right? The last thing you want this is to come in back and bite you because what you thought you were doing something good and end up being something where now you find yourself on a claim. And we learned throughout the years a few experiences we had, and one of them was If you leave it there, somebody will find a way to use it, not the conventional way, right? Whether they can use it as a skateboard. We all probably seen a bunch of TikTok videos, and that's my pet pick. People acting on the job, doing things. And oftentimes we might laugh about those, but you gotta be conscious and think about what's happening on my job site with my equipment. And if it's not being logged, or you would think it's logged, again, what is the expectation for the foreman, the PM, the estimator, everybody that works within your team? Do they all know that when they visit a job site, it's clear to everybody what the expectation is as a company? Any equipment left unattended needs to be locked or secured some way, whether it's a change with the log, whether it's a room, but the fact that it's understood at every level is key. I would suggest is one of those key pieces that is really important. And then quickly you'll find out there might be other type of equipment that needs to be also in the same situation. Mark that it belongs to your company for identifying it for purposes, and also there's some sort of controlling training with it.
Good point, George. And at Raymond, we're the same. If our carts are loaded with our material, it tends to keep them away from trying to take the cart. But when we're not in use and we're storing them, we do try to lock those up with some sort of chain and lock. But to George's point about horse trading on the job site with tools and equipment, because it does happen. It is a useful tool to work together with your trade partners. We use an equipment use agreement form George, you hit the nail on the head to identify that risk and shift that risk over to that trade partner that's going to be using your equipment, that they take full responsibility for their employees and their knowledge and their level of training for the equipment that they're going to use or borrow from us, that they take responsibility for their employees. So an equipment use agreement form, or you can develop that within your own company. I would highly recommend you do something like that. We use it for scaffolding, scissor lifts, boom lifts, carts, all that stuff.
I would assume that serialization would also help for those inspection reports as well, right? Like this is the last time we inspected this particular cart. Having some sort of record for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then how to train users on cart safety. I think that the big one that we discussed in our preparation meetings for this is just there seems to be an assumption that training is taking place. And many people will claim that they have had training and experience, but what they may really have is a bunch of bad habits. I'm going to turn it over to the team now. Ed made a really good point, about making sure that every piece of equipment does have a, training related to it, even if OSHA doesn't have a specific, 5-page document related to that specific piece of equipment.
Yeah, I would say these drywall carts, they're a material handling tool. So they need to be trained on like any other tool we use, whether it's a Hilti product or any kind of, powder actuated tools. I think there are a lot of assumptions. And typically the folks that are moving this drywall are not the folks that probably are the most knowledgeable about the carts. It's usually the youngest guys, the strongest backs on the job site that are, stocker scrappers or helping us out. Whereas I don't think we take the time properly with these individuals. And I know that George has an incredible, training on this drywall cart stuff, but I don't know when we get people either from the hall or they show up to our office to be hired. Yes, it has wheels. Yes, you think you just push it, but I think that there's a lot of technicalities to the cart, such as we talked about here today with, whether it's slopes or inspection processes or cutting through the, the handles or whatever it is. We've got to bring awareness to that and some of the weights to these things. And I think we'll get to it here in a little bit, but talking about, non-traditional use of carts. So these are drywall carts, but all the other products that we put on these carts is really key too.
So when talking about equipment, do employees ever have a voice in selecting certain equipments at your company?
So I would say for us, absolutely. There's plenty of room and opportunity for conversation around, products that we have or tools that we have or equipment. And that's what we lean on is our employees in the field utilizing stuff on a daily basis. What works, what doesn't work. Like I said, that either comes back through just the job site itself, or it comes all the way kind of full circle through the safety committees that we have in discussion around drywall carts, what works best, what doesn't work best, what manufacturers are better than others or what problems we're having. I think that that's something that the more vocal that these employees can be about the products that they're using or the tools, the better off the organization will be in helping to protect them.
I second that what Mike said. That is extremely important. If you deal with pushbacks on anything such as PPE, a policy or a equipment such as a cart, the one thing we learned along the years is oftentimes we thought what was best for the workers, or in some cases thinking financial terms, right? We're going to buy so many of these carts was the best bang for the buck. But what we realized too is at the same time, we were spending money that was unnecessary because we end up buying something else in a lot of cases. People were not happy with the type of equipment, the type of product, if it was PPE. So what we end up doing, and we learn from it a lot, is creating focus groups. So this is tied back to rewards, because sometimes we think if we give them a gift card, if we give them this recognition, that's going to be great. But you'll be surprised if you open the door and says, once a quarter, we're going to have a focus group where we bring supervisors in, and we're going to show them, different set of gloves or a different set of glasses or whatever that might be. And they get to give input. That is like being recognized for them because they feel they have a voice. And they also understand that they're the ones choosing this stuff that we're purchasing. At the end, we want them to use it. We want them to be happy, and they have input on it. So we did that with carts, and we try to do that with a lot of our PPE as well, because that seems to get the buy-in. So when somebody complains, who in the world picked this piece of equipment, we get to give the answer. You guys did. And you guys thought it was a good idea then. So if it doesn't work, let's revisit that. But that is a great tool. It motivates the culture. It gives back to the employee the morale that they are being heard, and it's key.
Agreed. Both George and Mike are hitting the nail on the head that, to have really good employee engagement, you have to empower them. And when you give them a voice, then they take ownership of whatever it is you're talking about, if it's tools or processes or safety protocols. It all works together.
Okay. So let's dive right into new practices and regulations. I'm going to try to move us a little bit quicker because I think we're running a little bit out of time. So no material on the floor. Does your general contract require that no material be left on the floor? This is just a yes, no question right now. Or Ed?
Yes, and not all of them, but by and large, most of our general contract. They want material stocked on wheels, and they want no trash hitting the floor. So we've got buggies and carts and all kinds of stuff on our job sites.
My answer is we're starting to see that as well. So it's coming.
Mike?
Yeah, I think it varies. Predominantly that's the way we choose to operate is with, everything off of carts and being mobile just from a production standpoint. But I do think that some of the general contractors are mandating that.
Okay, so next couple of slides are some of the reasons, in case people aren't familiar with them, why the industry is heading in this direction. So schedule changes. Schedules get moved all the time. Having the wrong material can cause disruptions if they can't be moved easily out of the way. So how does material left on the floor affect your scheduling?
I've got an example and you're right. The schedule is constantly moving. Delays happen, and we have to adjust out in the field as subcontractors. And if that material is stocked on the floor and it has to be picked up and moved and relocated to a new place, so the schedule can allow for somebody else to come in and get their work done, we've got excess manual material handling going on, so sprains and strains become a higher level risk, Or, and this is one that's happened to us a few times. When the material gets moved over and over and over again, sometimes it's not getting stacked properly. And we've had, this is specifically about some metal studs, but not so much drywall, but when we've had them fall over and pin people and cause some injuries. So if we can reduce the amount of times we have to touch that product before it's installed, meaning if it's on wheels and we got to move it and we can just push it out of the way, we would rather do that.
Good point, Edward. If I may add to that too, years ago we did a survey where we asked about safety. We were talking about pre-planning on the job site, and one of the items on the questionnaire was, do you think safety slows down the job? And overwhelmingly, we got a high response on that saying, yes, safety definitely slows down the job. When we started digging into the root cause, we found out it was because poor planning. People spending too much time looking for a ladder, people not having the right material when they needed to, jobs that were completely busy with other stuff, and damaging material from other trades while moving it because we needed to get the job done. So when you think of pre-planning, it goes impacted so many levels that it can benefit your job or it can affect your job. So having material on the job site, well pre-planned where it needs to be, and the fact that you can move it when need to is definitely going to take an impact as far as moving forward or having accidents because somebody tried to step on a box that somebody fell through, which we have some cases of those, is trying to complete a ceiling, but the box was there, that he wanted to move it. It has some high-end kitchen equipment, and down goes the story, right, where you have that accident that could be preventable.
Yeah, I think a big one of this is also, how does, our trade is mostly drywall, so it's really big stuff that's left in the way. How does that affect the other trades following behind you or even probably in front of you? One of the big things that we heard is like, if you leave the material on the floor, sometimes if someone else has to move it, they're going to back charge, they're going to charge the general for their time, and then the general might turn around and try to charge it to the drywall contractor, say, hey, you're the one who left this stuff behind, and that can be, very, very costly for your job sites. Okay. Another one is layout changes. So how does having a stack of drywall, affect your layouts?
Well, for us, during layout time, we don't typically have our board on site just yet. It's just chasing our layout crew up the building. I suppose if I'm saying that, maybe it's happened, but it's not custom practice for us to do it that way.
I would say for us is during layout time, it's also a good time for the foreman to identify where he's going to start the material. And once, he decides these are the tactical locations that they need to understand, you have some supervisors that is common nature. They immediately will identify that. So if they have a vendor delivering the material, or in our case, might be one of our companies saying we're delivering the material, they get to pre-plan how they're and where they're going to put certain amount of stacks. So that's key. I think that goes with supervisor training, when supervisors that get to do layout, or those that are doing layout, to be part of the training there when doing layout, where those material stocking comes into place as far as the discussions. Layout obviously is its own thing, but also understanding how tactical can you get about being effective, right, when the time of loading the job site with material comes.
Inclement weather. This one's a fun one, I think. Well, it's not fun, but it's pretty amazing what Mother Nature can do. But George, I think I'm gonna turn it over to you. You had some pretty good examples. How does wind or rain cause damage or safety issues?
Yeah, planning ahead, I think you might be on a job site that weather might be good, but then planning ahead, what's the quick response for a storm that is passing by on the same day, and you just received this warning that, there's a quick weather? Is the job equipped with covering the drywall? Is it in an area that all of a sudden you might find yourself where you have to move it quick and right away? What is the response to that? I think that's part of pre-planning, right? Sometimes you say, well, it's perfect weather, nothing going on, the drywall is good, but you might find yourself with, if there's a tornado or something coming in, are we prepared to at least seal that drywall, covering it up, Other cases where, most workers tend to sit on a stack of rock and eat lunch, and they drop whatever, is that also explained on your training? Is that determine places where to eat? How do we handle this situation? So there's plenty on that topic. I just think being prepared versus thinking, we'll manage, we'll wing it when the weather comes is something to think about.
And I think to kind of go along with that, if I may, I think if your stuff's on, the practice of putting everything on a cart. So, hey, let's face it, we get into these buildings, it may not be totally dried in. There may be elevator shafts, stuff like that are still, working on, and water may be coming inside the building. So it allows you to move that material around quickly. Kind of going along with George, if a storm comes up, we've had a couple instances where we've been doing a lot of roof work. And transporting materials around on a roof. And so being able to secure not only the material, but the cart itself from flying off the building is really key in these extreme weather events.
We had an incident where to Mike's point is where the walls were covered, but there was a roof where water was still, able to get into the building. And it so happened that the carts with the material didn't get wet, but when they got to move it, they had to go through all this, full of tons of water on the floor that caused the accident. So definitely there's enough here to say, what is our plan when material handling at the job site, when weather conditions are one of those topics.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I think Mike and I have had similar experiences on the same job site, in fact, where weather conditions pose not only a hazard on the job site for the employees, but when we had some high winds on a project out in our Las Vegas market, we would at one point lost a half a stack of drywall blown right off of the building due to high winds. Even though we had it tied down, it still broke the ties that were on there. So we looked to improve and beef up the straps we were using versus some tie downs, and so Mother Nature can really pose some hazards for us on the job site.
So the gist of the story is, if the cart is on wheels, then you can just take that entire stack of drywall somewhere safe with interior walls and not worry about it flying down. If it's stacked on the floor, then doesn't matter how big the straps are, a tornado is probably going to take that out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And then we've got floor weight limitations. So wanting to make sure that the drywall and materials are stored on wheels or stored properly, just in case the floor, or if they lean it up against a wall, that what you're leaning or putting the drywall against can actually handle the weight. Do you guys have any stories or examples of this?
Yes, I think oftentimes you got where layout is being done, then, core drilling was done, there's some penetrations on the floor. They either get covered by pieces of plywood or some other device that is made for that. Understanding that, explaining that to the employees when they're moving either something with wheels, right? Not necessarily a cart, but it could be also a scaffold, a mobile scaffold, or even a lift. I think that's a great topic of discussion, because understanding sometimes because it seems to be covered, that doesn't necessarily mean it is the right weight limitation. You got to understand that, you have seasoned employees and you got new employees that in some cases have even put pieces of drywall on top of the holes, only to find out, that was not a piece of plywood. On the other hand, removing the pieces of plywood because it's time to, like, for instance, lay out your track, right? And we had incidents where they actually take off the piece of plywood, nails are still on, and then you have an incident because somebody left it behind. Anyways, understanding the hazards coming to, because it can cause from a car being tipped over to actually have something dangerous underneath that somebody oversaw the capacity of that cover.
Going to turn over to another quick poll question. So what is your experience with no material on the floor? So our current job sites have these policies and we are prepared with the correct equipment. Most of our future job sites have these policies, but we're not prepared. And then we do not have any experience with this rule, but it sounds like a good idea. And we don't have an experience with this rule, but we think it's going to be a burden. So just curious what, the field's thoughts on those are as well.
40% said job sites have policies and prepared with correct equipment. Job sites have policies and not prepared is 27%. No policies, and it sounds like a good idea, 20%. And lastly, no policies and sounds like a burden, 13%.
So we got a good mix of different experiences as well. Okay. So a big solution is, moving drywall only on wheels and also storing it flat. So a big thing that we're going to save here is it's very hard to have a tipping hazard with something stored flat. You can store more board per cart. The board can be loaded by forklift or boom, and you can quickly and easily move it. Does our panelists have anything to add for this, or I guess I'll go to the next slide. So some of the advantages of, putting sheets on a dolly. There's a lot of things that need to go in with pre-planning and communication. So each work site should have rules in place. How many sheets can you transport flat on the dolly? And those rules should be communicated to workers and stockers prior to delivery. So how do you guys set standards for how many sheets should be transported flat on dollies versus standing up?
George, I think you're the one that's got the rules on this one.
All right, so yes, we try to keep it under 14 or 12, depending, because we have some that are a little wider. But we normally keep 12 sheets of rock because of the size. That leaves like a 4-inch gap up front. The reason for that is because we normally know that they stripe the sheet and they have some room to bend it, and also when transporting it.
George, we're talking about transporting it flat though.
Not flat. This is a standing up. We don't have flat dollies transporting.
So if
I know last time you.
Oh, sorry. I have a question here. So if you're using these flat carts, how do you move through a 3 feet wide door with these on the flat cart?
So these carts aren't going to allow you to move the drywall cart from room to room. This is for when it's brought in with a traditional drywall cart, and then you need to store it flat on the floor instead of standing it up on a drywall cart. So yeah, it's a little different usage case. Ed, we talked about last time, the problem with these types of carts, I'm going to go back to the last page as well, is that because there's no top, a lot of people think that you can just keep going up and up and up and up and up and up and keep going, forever basically. But these carts do have a limitation for weight. The wheels can only handle so much. And then the additional problem is that if you load it up too much, your employees aren't going to be able to stop it or start it. It's going to be really, really heavy and too hard to move. So that's why you have to have rules in place on your job site specific to how much to stock lying down, as well as, standing upright on a traditional drywall cart. And then, we discussed in our planning meetings was like, there was a lot of pre-planning that can take place for this process. How much weight is safe for our guys to push when the drywall is stored flat, and then how much weight can the floor handle as well? I mean, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is a really big one for these carts. Since when you're storing flat, you can store more, but the plywood deck that you're on may not be rated to handle that, and you might not even realize that. And then when you stock drywall flat as well, or even on a cart, there's a lot of different pre-planning that can take place as well, to make sure that your drywall is stacked in the order that it's going to be used when you hang it on the walls, so that you can reduce a lot of moving drywall around, restacking. You go from the top and make your way down. You guys have anything to add for that?
I can share with you that when we can do that, as far as getting enough time ahead to plan ahead and order the drywall from our stocking and suppliers, we will have it preloaded, so we're pulling one sheet off and it's got a specific spot to go to, and that particular stack of drywall may have several different types of drywall in it, so that we're not having to shuffle board around it and to get a project done. So we try to do that when we can. More often than not, we do that. And that kind of going back to your other point there, just for a second, that those flat carpets, they don't fit every solution, but when we can use those, we use them as much as we can. But yes, you're right. You're not going to be able to take it through a traditional, standard doorway, especially in that repetitive sort of tower work. They probably aren't the best solution, but we try to find ways to use those as much as we can.
So for the
we are running
flats,
low on.
yeah, just one more question for the flats. Is it overloading the floor below? Does that take into consideration how heavy and which floor or subsurface you should be pushing that cart on?
Yes, for us, we get with the builder early on and figure out what the point loading weight is on the floor, because it dictates quite a bit more often than not whether it's scissor lifts or stacks of drywall or what have you, that they'll let you know how much weight can be loaded on those floors.
Yeah, we have a few safety things here. So, if you're going to use these types of carts where they're the flat carts loaded side by side for flat drywall, as a manufacturer, my recommendation is you always find a cart that can be connected. The reason is you don't want two flat carts, one cart keeps going and then you hit some sort of bump, and then that second wheel basically comes free, and then all of a sudden you're stacked and your load can shift significantly. So making sure that they're tied in together is very important. When using a forklift to load these as well, you want to make sure that you place your dunnage, your schluters, your bunks, your spacers as evenly as possible, and you balance the load across the cart. So we have this is an image of 12-foot drywall being moved. This is 5/8, it's 2 loads. Notice we got 4 guys. That is a very heavy load. And we make sure to distribute that evenly between the 2 carts, and these 2 carts are connected underneath. Do you guys have anything to add to this style of moving carts? And then making sure you pick the right casters. So, some casters are made for more maneuverability and some casters are made to handle more weight. Selecting the right ones for the right job is very important. So this is just another review too. Watch the floors, make sure you don't stack too high. And I have a picture of a traditional drywall cart here loaded up to the max, right? With the carts that are, flat, there's no top, there's no limit to that. But common sense says that you do have to, put a limit to how much you stack, or else if that cart starts, you're not going to be able to stop it. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I have on storing drywall flat. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. And last question, what's the typical weight rating for most drywall carts, or does that depend on the cart and the manufacturer?
Most carts say 3,200 pounds because that's the limit to that style of wheel. But we had discussed during the first drywall cart session that, none of the guys on this panel actually recommend putting that much weight. That's too many stacks of drywall standing up. And, you have a lot of issues with tipping if you go, if you try to max that cart out fully, because it's really the limitations of the humans managing the cart, not the cart itself. So, we have, a few bonus material pictures here. I know we're kind of going over time, but, drywall carts or, other material handling carts aren't only used for drywall. So, you want to make sure when you're moving studs also to prevent sliding, because these things can be very, very slippery, especially when they're straight out of the factory and oiled up. Cut straps and stuff like that with something blocking it so it doesn't come crashing down on your legs.
Okay, thank you, presenters, for our part 2 of drywall cart safety. We appreciate you being here and your time. Thank you, attendees. You can check out part 1 and part 2 on our YouTube website. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.